Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and there are many talented, extraordinary people in the Jewish world, literally shaping Jewish life and expanding Jewish sensitivity, our understanding and appreciation of the myriad facets of life and of being Jewish in our times. And one of these extraordinary people is a fabulous woman whom I've been privileged to know through my work with Jewish media. It's an extraordinary honor for me to be sitting with Francine Klagsbrun, whose career has been as multifaceted as it has been enriching of others. And if you're meeting Francine for the first time, I want to tell you just a little bit about her many contributions that have been a blessing to all of us. Francine is a pioneer in the feminist movement, both on the American scene, writing for Ms. magazine in the early 1970s, serving as editor of the first Ms. Reader, and of the classic Frida B., You and Me. And on the Jewish scene, contributing editor to Lilith magazine, and one of the founders of Women of the Wall. She was the first woman to actually carry a Torah to the Western Wall. She's a thinker, a leader in the Jewish community. She served as chairwoman of the Board of Overseers of the Jewish Theological Seminary Library, secretary of the Board of Trustees of the Jewish Museum, a member of the Board of Directors of the National Jewish Book Council. And Francine is probably best well known as a writer. She publishes a weekly column, Thinking Aloud, and she's an esteemed author of more than a dozen books, virtually every one of them a Jewish classic, including Voices of Wisdom, Jewish Ideals and Ethics for Everyday Living, Jewish Days, a book of Jewish life and culture around the year, The Fourth Commandment about the Shabbat, and books for society as a whole, some of which are Freedom Now, the story of the abolitionists, Psychiatry, what it is, what it does, Married People, Staying Together in the Age of Divorce, and a number of books for children, such as The Story of Moses. And now Francine Klagsbrun has published a biography of Golda Meir that's received rave reviews everywhere. It's entitled Lioness, Golda Meir and the Nation of Israel, published by Shokin Books of Penguin Random House. It is so wonderful to have you at this table. I have enormous regard for you. I've had for many, I don't know, it seems decades now, and every time we're together, you enrich me and those around me, and I'm so glad to have you here on L'Chaim and JBS. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. It makes me feel terrific, and we are old friends.
Yes, we are. It's wonderful. So, first of all, you acknowledge early in the book there have been a lot of biographies about Golda Meir, including an authorized autobiography. And yet, you try to explain to us why you, Francine, after all the writing you've done, you decide you want to spend, how long does this book take?
At least 8 years.
Okay, this is sort of a love of yours,
Yes,
right?
yes.
What prompted you to write Lioness when there have been other biographies of Golda Meir?
Well, first of all, an editor, I must be honest, a publisher asked me to do it, but what made me accept that was the more I thought about her and the more I looked up things about her, I realized that although there have been other books, as you say, they haven't sort of given her her due. They haven't gone into the kind of depth that I really felt that she deserved. And because in recent years there have been files that open, archives that open, documents that are now ready to be read, I thought we need to update what we know about her. And it's almost 40 years since she died. So we need a perspective of who was this woman? And why was she so important in her own day? And what does she mean to us today? And I thought, this is what I want to know. And this was a woman who was the first and only Prime Minister of Israel.
First woman.
First woman, yes.
And
first
only
and only
woman, right.
only woman Prime Minister of Israel, yes.
You know, you write in some way throughout the book, at one point you say it's a paradox, but really you show the paradox. This is a woman of paradox as I read the book.
Yes, indeed.
This is a complicated person. She was a very complicated human being, and hopefully we all are, and she has a right to be complicated. But you talk about the paradox in a number of places where, on the one hand, she had an image and a persona in the diaspora, especially here in America, among American Jews. I grow up, Golda's iconic in my life, and she's experienced by my generation as a grandmother. And you write about how she's perceived in the diaspora, and then you talk about how in Israel, she was the prime minister during the Yom Kippur War. Wow. She has a very different image and reputation. Would you talk for a moment about the two sides, the paradox that you write about?
Right.
Golda Meir, how she's understood and embraced in the diaspora, especially in American Jewry, and how it's not the same in Israel.
Right, absolutely. And it's something that bothers me very much. And I want to just say this, that I am trying to rehabilitate her in a way. And there are people in Israel who are doing the same thing now. There's somebody in the Israel archive who put out a big book of Golda's in Hebrew, of Golda's, not of Golda, but of documents of that period, who also agrees with me that she needs to be rehabilitated.
Oh, isn't that interesting? I'm only interrupting you for a moment.
Sure.
Golda Meir needs to be rehabilitated.
In Israel?
Yes.
I mean, I know, that in itself sounds like a crazy paradox,
yeah.
right? Yes, because of just what you said. Look, her reputation went down partly, largely with the Yom Kippur War. Nevertheless, after that war, she still was elected again. So it hadn't gone down completely yet with the war. But there was and Israel won that war. People forget that Israel won that war. But there was such a feeling for the first time of vulnerability, the first time the country felt, you know what, we're not as great as we thought we were after the '67 war. And Golda was the head of, so the blame began to move toward her. So many people were killed, so many soldiers, about 2,500, 2,600, and everybody knew somebody who was killed. Again, so who do you blame? You blame the person who was in charge. And in addition to that, I would say, there's a kind of sexism that existed also. It's looking back, they say, oh, people who worked for her. She was one tough person. She was a powerful woman. And she died. These young people who worked for her when they were young went on to live, and they could get back at her now. They didn't like working for such a powerful woman. So this combination of, yes, there was this terrible war. Yes, she was the head of it at that time, although she held the country together. She was a rock during that war. But, okay, she was ultimately, you can say, responsible in that sense. But also there was a kind of sexism. And because of the war, that sexism went retroactively. So looking back, they would say, this is a woman who was very filled with self-confidence. Well, somehow that self-confidence got translated now into self-righteousness. She was fearless. Somehow that became arrogance. So I think it was a combination of factors. And, people don't let go so easily with their stereotypes. So that's what continued in Israel. And as I say, I think beginning now.
You think so?
I do think so. I think, well, people, I'm trying, but no, I think there are others who are trying. In the United States, of course, we didn't suffer from that war, although we were terrified when Israel was in that war. For us, Golda was one of ours. She was one of ours. She was the local girl who made good. She lived in Milwaukee, and goes to then pre-state Israel. Pre-state Israel, Palestine, British mandated Palestine, and all of a sudden there she is rising through the ranks. what was it about this woman? She had something that other...
What was it, Francine,
you
about...
know?
But people should remember, Golda Meir was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence of the modern state of Israel.
That's right.
This Golda Meirson from...
Golda
that's right, by the way.
Golda Mabovich, then Golda Meirson.
Yes.
And, right.
From Milwaukee.
From Milwaukee,
is
right?
signing the Declaration of Independence of the state of Israel.
Unbelievable, right?
How does that happen, do you think? And what I mean by... You tell the story.
Right, of course.
But I'm asking about... You have a sense of who she is as a human being,
Right.
as a woman. How does it happen?
She was so dedicated. From the beginning, she had an ideal. Why did she leave America, a land of opportunity, to go to this Palestine? She was so dedicated to her ideal. So that was one thing. And she was willing to work hard. She took on every hard job there was to do. Other people didn't want to do it. She did it and stayed with it and worked and worked and worked. Sometimes, you know, she'd go to raise money. She would leave her children for months at end.
Yes.
The children didn't like it, although when they got older, they
appreciated
it. They appreciated it. But she was willing to do that. So I think there's that absolute determination. That was one thing. She had enormous charisma. This was a woman that, when she spoke, somebody, you know, her colleague said to me, when she spoke, she could read the pages from the phone book and people would cry. She had that enormous charisma, and she also had this ability, even Ben-Gurion said it, to speak to the heart. She could reach, just simple, straightforward, she could reach your heart. So that was a very welcome thing. I mean, other people talked and talked and talked, but she could do it, and so she got a lot of followers. Women came to really admire her, and gradually men, and particularly David Ben-Gurion, came to see how competent she was. Ben-Gurion described there was a funeral, and everybody was giving eulogies. And he said, there were all these boring eulogies, and then Golda spoke. And she said exactly what had to be said. So she had that great ability. And then, in addition to all that, she had the ambition. She would never admit it. In those days, you would never admit that you had ambition. You know, oh, no, I just did this because the party wanted me to. But she had that ambition, and she was willing to keep going till she got to where she was.
Mm-hmm. You also tell us she was very political.
Very.
Politically astute. Yes?
Yes, very smart.
And this is even from when she was young.
She was.
She rose through all kinds of organizational and labor unions.
That's right.
You describe that in the book.
Yes, she was like a real labor unionist. I mean, that's who she was. Tough, very smart, very shrewd. You know, sometimes people say to me, "What surprised you in doing this book?" One of the things that surprised me is, you know, she always had that grandmotherly image, as you said. She was so smart. She was so smart. She could see to the heart of a situation and act on it. And she was an activist. She acted on what she believed in. So that was another thing that helped her to get ahead. But she was smarter than anybody realizes. For example, in the Yom Kippur War, which was much later, but it was typical, she made military decisions that you would think only a general could make. But she knew what to do. For example, she was asked, should we send the troops to the south? Both to the south, or should we keep going in the north till we get to Damascus? She decided to keep going in the north because if there's a ceasefire, we'll have something to show. See, I mean, just shrewd and clever, and all through her life was that way, and very political, and very willing to use her political shrewdness.
Mm-hmm. Let's spend one moment on the Yom Kippur War. First of all, at that time, Moshe Dayan was involved.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay. And many Israelis now understand they blame Moshe Dayan for some kind of failure of nerve.
That's correct.
Second, Americans, Jews often don't realize when Israel goes to war, there's a national mobilization. Right. It stops the country dead, and it costs a fortune.
Right.
And no prime minister does that unless the prime minister is absolutely sure it's necessary.
Absolutely.
And it seemed to be, and then I want to hear what you feel about this, that there were mixed signals coming to Golda Meir, and she didn't pull the trigger on national mobilization, but there were reasons. She blames herself after the fact for not having mobilized. But as a human being, I can understand how a prime minister, male or female, nothing to do with being a woman,
I agree with you.
would be, she relied on information, intelligence, and on the advice of people like Diane. And in the end, the buck stops with her, and she's held responsible. But there were extenuating circumstances that prompted her to delay and delay and delay, so that ultimately the Yom Kippur War becomes a, quote, surprise attack. It wasn't nearly as much as a surprise
That's correct.
to Golda Meir and the Israeli establishment as it was to us.
Yes.
And I'm a young rabbi. On Yom Kippur, I arrive to lead services on Yom Kippur morning, and as I walk into the room, I'm told about the Yom Kippur War. I didn't see it coming, but they did.
They did.
And they had to make a decision, and it was a painful decision
Right.
not to call up mobilization. First, do you feel I'm describing it accurately?
Absolutely.
Okay. And you want to talk all about how she, in retrospect, and reflected upon the difficulty of that decision.
Well, first of all, you have to understand what was going on at the time. It was after the '67 war. There was a sense of euphoria, and that continued. That was one thing. Second thing is that there was what was called the conception. And the conception was that unless Egypt gets certain weapons from the Soviet Union, it was the Cold War period, get certain weapons from the Soviet Union with which they can absolutely strike Israel, they will not go to war against Israel. And Syria would not go to war without Egypt. So, well, Egypt had not gotten those weapons. So there was this sense that it was so sort of nutty because they were so wedded to this idea. Eli Zaira, who was the head of Amman, who was the military intelligence particularly, kept saying there's a low probability of war. It was not going to happen because Egypt doesn't have these weapons. And no matter what happened, he kept saying that. Well, as you say, I agree with you. A man or a woman, when your military intelligence says to you there's a low probability, don't worry about it. You know, she worried, but you don't act on it. So that was a very important factor in all of this. And then they said, and even if there is a war, look at us. In 6 days, we wiped out the Arabs. We'll win in no time, you know. So there's nothing to worry about. Golda always worried. She was always worried about it, but she followed what they said. And then a few days before the war began, all of a sudden, they get information that the Soviet advisors who were in Egypt are being hurried out of the country. And Golda says, what's going on? What's going on here? You know, what do we do? Low probability, don't worry about it. Maybe they think we're going to attack them. And she had such a gut feeling that something was really wrong, but she didn't act on it. So she blamed herself. Mm-hmm. She said, all my life I followed my own intuition, and this time I didn't. Earlier in the year, in May of that year, the Yom Kippur War was in October, they had mobilized. Mobilized, and as you say, it's an enormous expense. You have to people have to understand that Israel doesn't keep a large standing army. It's all the reserves that they have to use, and that's who they have to mobilize.
It's a civilian army.
That's right. It's a civilian army, exactly. And I think people don't, remember that.
You're right.
So that's why you have to. The mobilization is so important. But you can't spend gazillions of dollars again if there's a low probability of the war. So that was why she didn't act, but she always blamed herself for that. And then she said, I will never again be the person I was before the Yom Kippur War. And she wasn't, yet she continued, she stayed active, she continued to be involved, in all sorts of activities.
Francine, did you ever see Golda's balcony with Tova Felcher?
I did.
Did you feel it was accurate?
No.
Can you give us one example?
Okay, well, I tell you the basics of it. When I saw it, I had not yet done my research, but I questioned it anyway. But after I did,
but you know more now.
I know much more now, and I don't like. I mean, it was a very dramatic, And Tova,
as a play, it's a nice play.
Yes, and Tova was terrific as Golda.
Right.
So I don't want to take away from any of that.
Yes, she is fabulous.
Yes.
That's not my question.
No, I know.
Okay.
So I'm going to answer your question, but I wanted to just have that little qualification.
Okay.
The thesis is wrong. The thesis is, and it's based on a book that said that when Dinitz, at some meeting, Dinitz and Kissinger had a little time together. It was when the war was on, and that Dinitz threatened Kissinger and said, if you don't send us the arms that we need right now, we're going to use our nuclear capacity. And that's the basis of the play. I mean, that's, you know, what they talk about a great deal.
Golda's balcony refers to, in the play,
At
the balcony she stood at
in Dimona.
in
She
Dimona, visiting the nuclear plant.
Yeah, now I have to say, I was not. It's possible that she visited. I could not confirm that. Nobody said she did. And I actually got to know quite well a former head of the Shin Bet. Now, it's true, you know, these people go to their graves with secrets. They don't tell you everything. But he said, she didn't visit. Let me check for you. Let me check for you. And he called the people in Dimona that he knew. And they said, no, that's not true. She didn't come. She came occasionally, but not frequently, you know, not often like that. So that's one thing. But I also spoke to Henry Kissinger. And again, you know, people in his position don't always tell you the absolute truth, but in this case, I believe he did.
And I'm sorry, forgive me, when do you speak to Henry Kissinger?
When I was doing my research for this book.
For this book?
Yes.
Within the last 8 years?
Yes.
You spoke to Henry Kissinger?
Yeah, yeah.
He was willing to speak with you?
Well, this was funny. He said, somebody arranged this for me, somebody who were mutual, you know, mutual acquaintance. And Kissinger said, okay, I'll give her 15 minutes, I'm very busy. So I said, okay, I'll take the 15 minutes. But when we met, we got along so well, and he was so charming and really nice to me. So it went on for over an hour.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And it was really, really good.
I am not surprised, Francine.
Oh, thank you. But it was a very good, in fact, the funny thing is, this is sort of off the subject, but we got along so well, and it was right before Passover, and I always do a big Seder. And the person who knows both of us was coming to that Seder. I was at the tip of my tongue. I was asking him, invite him if he wanted to come to our Seder, but I stopped myself. I don't think he was that in love with me, you know.
So do you think he was being honest with you?
I do believe he was being honest with me.
Okay, and because in the play, there's a lot about Golda trying to get Kissinger to basically intervene in the Yom Kippur War and save Israel.
Right.
So what did he say?
What he said is, Israel did not threaten us with their nuclear capacity. We knew they had it, but they did not threaten us. Why? He said it would have been very dangerous for them to do so. First of all, I could not have made that decision alone. I would have had to go up to the National Security Board, to the president himself. Second of all, Israel's stance was, and really it still is, ambiguous. They never have admitted that they had this. Now, if they came to me and threatened me and I had to take it up higher, they're admitting that they had it, so I have to handle it in that way. One of the reasons that's very bad about it at that time, particularly admitting that they had it, would be that then the Soviet Union would think they really have to supply nuclear arms to Egypt and to Syria. And there was some evidence that they were sending, not large size that Israel had, but some nuclear weapons to those countries. So it would have been a very dangerous thing for Israel to do that, to threaten us. And he said it never happened. And I said, yeah, but Golda's balcony. He said, I don't want to hear about it. Absolutely, it never happened. And I really believe that he is correct. And so, again, some of the people from the archive, the Israel archive, agree with me 100%. They saw the balcony. They said, this is crazy.
Okay, it was historical fiction.
That's right.
It is true that Kissinger did, in some way, influence Nixon to help. Correct?
Yeah, it's a question about that too. He did. There's a real question because there are people who think that Kissinger kind of held up sending the arms a little bit because America thought, just the way Israel had thought, well, you know, they're going to win. We don't want. He doesn't want to humiliate the Arabs another time. So there was some question. He blamed Schlesinger, James Schlesinger, who was the Secretary of Defense, whom I also interviewed, and Schlesinger blamed Kissinger. So it's hard to know what happened there. It was really, I have to say, that Nixon finally came through very strong. I mean, most Americans are not in love with Nixon, but he really came through.
In this instance, he came through.
He came through, and they were fighting, should we send this many things? Send them all, he said. Should it be this kind? Whatever damn thing you have, just send it. That's what he said, and he really came through himself. So it's hard to know. I would assume Kissinger's influence to some extent, but it's hard to know how much Kissinger held back and how much Schlesinger held back.
Okay. We should also remember although the war started badly for Israel, it turned.
Absolutely.
And in the end, Israel had encircled the Egyptian army
That's
in the
correct.
Sinai and was about to just destroy it. And Kissinger insisted the Israelis stop.
Right.
You remember that?
Absolutely, because Kissinger felt, I mean, first of all, that happened because Sadat made a terrible blunder. He was doing so well. He had hubris now. He was euphoric. He was doing well at the beginning of the war. So this wonderful Third Army of his had been stationed across the Suez Canal. You have to remember that was sort of this side of the Suez, the Egyptian side of the Suez Canal. And they were stationed there, and that was stopping the Israelis. They were really a force. Well, he decided he really wanted to get the Sinai back, so he took that Third Army and started sending them to the other side where Israel occupied, the east side. And that's when Israel encircled them. And yes, it wasn't that, I don't know that Golda would have ended up really wanting to starve these people, but it was a bargaining point, and that was her bargaining point with Kissinger, who insisted that they feed them and give them water, when some things. I have a funny story about that. The soldiers who were delivering this food said to Golda, we had to deliver them boxes and boxes of cigarettes. That's what they also wanted, this Third Army. But we didn't save any for you because they were filtered, and we know you only smoke unfiltered cigarettes. But that was it. She did give in on that.
Interesting enough, she often visited the Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem.
That's correct.
And she would smoke. She always was smoking.
Yes.
You know that also. So the cigarette is one of the,
She was a chain smoker.
Yes.
She never stopped smoking.
Yes.
I mean, I'll tell you something funny. A woman came over to me when people were buying books, and she said, "This is a very bad cover." And I said, "Why?" She said, "A cigarette? I mean, it's giving the wrong message." I said, "This woman never stopped smoking. She has to have a cigarette in her mouth."
Okay. It's basically only, 4 or 5 years later that Menachem Begin wins a surprise election. Likud, Labor had been in virtual control of Israel the entire time. And lo and behold, soon after, Anwar Sadat gets on a plane and flies to Jerusalem. And there's that very famous dinner where Sadat is sitting there, and to his left is Golda Meir.
Right.
Do you have any story for me about that?
Yeah, I have stories about Sadat.
Yes.
First of all, when Golda was at the airport to meet Sadat, along with the dignitary, even though she was not in office any longer. And when Sadat got off the plane, he said, "Mrs. Meir, I have wanted to meet you for a very long time." And she said in her blunt way, "Well, why didn't you come?" And he said the time was not yet ripe, meaning he needed this war. Mm-hmm. He wanted this one more war to equalize things, because the Arabs had been so humiliated back then. Then at this lovely, it was a dinner or lunch, I think it was, I don't remember if it was a dinner or lunch, whatever, she had brought a gift for his granddaughter, and I thought that was so Golda, a gift for his granddaughter. Never mind this dealing, big, high, important, blah, blah, and that'll happen too. But on a human level, Golda could deal on a human level, and he appreciated that. Now, when he was speaking about whatever he was speaking, and she interrupted him, and she said something about being an old lady. She said, "I know you always called me an old lady," and he roared, because he did call her the old lady. But he had enormous, and this is something Kissinger said to me, Sadat had enormous respect for Golda. Mm-hmm. He thought she was really something.
Yes, and she was. Do you have any idea how she felt about him?
I think I would say she had mixed feelings. She felt, Sadat and Begin got the Nobel Prize, and she said about both of them, well, they should win an Oscar for their performance, So it was that. I think she came to respect him. I think, at the beginning, nobody knew who this guy was. He seemed like a clown. Kissinger called him Rigoletto, like the Rigoletto in the opera, because he changed his mind. He kept saying things. They never, and Golda too. But I think she came to respect him. I don't think she hated Nasser, for example, who came before Sadat. She hated him. She really saw him as totally evil. I don't think she saw Sadat as totally evil in that way. I think she came to respect him, as he did her.
There's a quote, a very famous quote, attributed to Golda Meir. Palestinians? Who are the Palestinians?
Yeah.
Speak about that for a moment.
There are no such things as Palestinians,
Yes.
she said. Right. Got him into so much trouble. I think, first of all, what she meant at the time, and I really think sincerely what she meant was there was no Palestinian nationalism. There had not been. There's some on a little bit of nationalism going on. The few on the very far left in Israel recognized that, but most people did not. Most people, including the UN, spoke of the Palestinians as refugees. And when they dealt with anybody, it was with the nations, with Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, and so on. Nobody dealt with them as a nation because they were not really formed as a nation yet. I think that was very much what she meant. And that was part of this sort of her smartness also. Part of because she felt, and people misunderstand this, so she felt there should not be a Palestinian state as such. She said there should not be a third state in that area. She felt very strongly, and so did Kissinger and many others, what they called the Jordanian solution, that the West Bank, what we call the West Bank, should be combined with Jordan, and that would be a big Palestinian state. Who would rule it? I mean, she would have favored the Hussein and his family, but that was not her business. That would be the Palestinian state. She said they could call it Palestine if they want, and that would be fine. But she did not, so saying there are no Palestinians also is saying there is no Palestinian nationalism that would form a separate state. It should be part of Jordan because that's where thousands upon thousands of Palestinians live. Then she would say, and she wasn't wrong, but I always thought, she should have said the whole thing, but okay. She would say, and this is true, when I first came to Palestine, British mandated Palestine, we were the Palestinians. And if you look at the newspapers at that time, they referred to the Jews as the Palestinians.
Absolutely. At the World's Fair, the Palestinian pavilion
was a Jewish. Absolutely. So that's what she was also, at her first passport had marked on it, Palestinian. So that's what she was referring to.
Incidentally, there has been an evolution of Jewish thinking vis-a-vis
Right.
the Palestinian national liberation movement.
Exactly.
The liberation part bothers us because we know when they use that phrase,
Right.
they're not talking about the West Bank. They're talking about
everything.
from the river to the sea.
Right.
But we do understand that, for whatever reasons, Palestinian nationalism, which was not there in 48 or in 67,
Right.
did develop over time.
That's correct.
And my instinct is, and you may disagree with me, I believe if Golda were living today, she would evolve as well.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that. I really am, because people the people who don't like her in Israel, they see her back then. Look what happened to the Rabin. I mean, he was no different than she. He was absolutely wedded to the Jordanian solution. He was the one who said, if you recall, when the uprising happened, break their bones. I mean, right? And then look at Rabin. Look how he evolved. Look how he changed. Golda was not the most flexible person in the world, but I truly believe that over time she would have changed and done that.
Do you have any idea how she felt about Menachem Begin?
She hated him.
Hated him.
She hated him because he treated her so badly. He so insulted her, particularly after the Yom Kippur War. He had this mantra: why didn't you mobilize the troops earlier? Why didn't you? I forget the second part, but mobilize was the main one. Over and over, and he accused her. Just ignoring so much. That's one thing. But the other thing, even earlier than the Yom Kippur War, Begin and the Likud were very opposed to any kind of compromise at all, like giving up a drop of land, an inch of land. And when Golda, for example, in 1970, after the attrition war, she agreed to give up a little space and to make peace, or at least to stop the attrition war. And Begin tore her into pieces. So if I were Golda, it would have been very hard for me, to like Menachem Begin. And he became a big hero because of the peace, of course. But his attitude until then, and even then, I mean, he was willing to give back all of Sinai. He was not willing to give back the West Bank. So it was a whole different kind of a situation. He's not a hero in terms of Mr. Liberal over there, but he did do this wonderful, agreement. So I think that Golda had her good reasons to not like him. He attacked her. And you know, if she made any compromise, he was in there attacking.
Yes. We don't understand the political dynamic inside Israel.
That's right.
Do you know how she felt about Yitzhak Rabin?
She liked him. She thought of him. I mean, there was a little, you know, she treated him as a son. And when Nixon said something praising him when he was retiring at the end of his term, Rabin's term, Golda said, he said, you know, I hope you have a very good spot for him in the government, or, you know, and Golda said, we'll see how he behaves. I can't tell you how many Israeli men quoted that to me.
Really?
Yeah, as a bad thing that Golda did because it embarrassed Rabin and so on. Okay. So she was being, you know, a little Golda-ish, a little cantankerous maybe, but she had great respect for him, and she loved him. She loved him as a son, and she also respected him because he was a Sabra. He had been born in, you know, in the land of Israel, and she had great respect for that.
You know, as someone who has been within the feminist community virtually your entire life, if a man had said, we'll see how he behaves, no one would have said a word.
Right.
And you know, I don't see sexism everywhere I look. At the same time, every now and then, it's so clear that a woman is not permitted to do or say what a man is permitted.
And particularly in Israel, and certainly at that time, even more so.
Okay, and at the same time, there are many ways in which Israel is a leader in the way it incorporates, gives opportunity to women, but it doesn't mean it's free of any kind of, that there's no sexual bias in Israel.
No, absolutely. In fact, one of the things that's been misleading is because Israel had women in the service long before anybody else and so on, and here's a woman who became prime minister. But there have not been any other women prime ministers since Golda. And there was the women in the service for many years, they were given low-level jobs. They were not fighting in combat until, you know, more recently. So they always have said, you know, it looks as if we had equality. We didn't have equality. And there's a women's movement in Israel that really struggled for equality.
Okay. I want to come back to who she was as a person. And you made slight reference to this when you said she was so involved in her public life, not politics, but her public life, that her children resented it. What we understand is, and you write about this in different ways in the book, there's a chapter you have, something about darkness.
The dark years?
The dark years, yeah. It looks like she had a difficult marriage and that her relationship with her children was difficult. By the way, she's only a human being.
Right.
You know, you wrote a book about divorce. Men and women
about marriage, marriage and the age of divorce. Right?
Yes. You wrote about marriage as in contrast to what you saw was a large percentage of people getting divorced.
Right.
So it's not like, oh, this is because it's Golda. At the same time, it seems to be true that her husband was Morris.
Morris, yes.
Her relationship with Morris was very complicated. It was not a typical happy marriage.
No.
And her whole family constellation was atypical. Fair to say?
Fair to say. First of all, she fell in love with Morris. She was 16 years old, and he was 5 years older than she. And he was a sign painter, but he loved music particularly. He loved art, he loved literature. And she didn't have any background in that. She had gone to high school, she didn't go beyond, she a little bit of normal school, and she dropped out. So she was very, very taken with that. He opened up that whole world to her that she knew nothing about. So she fell in love with him for that. But she pretty soon surpassed him. You know, one of the things I wrote about, and sometimes I speak about, is his mother came to meet the family before they got married. And his mother just didn't think that this Golda was good enough for her son. Morris, I would laugh, you know, and then look what happened. But it was a difficult marriage, and she surpassed him. I mean, plain and simple. She just went where he didn't keep up, and that he was a dreamer. He was a dreamer, and she was a doer. But, you know, I was told, and I didn't see this, but I was told that the only photograph she ever kept near her bed was a photograph of Morris. In spite of it all, he was the first love of her. She had other lovers, but he was the first love of her life. So it was very difficult. As far as the children, she was leaving all the time. She was traveling, going to the States. As I said, she left her daughter once for 9 months. It was only half the daughter's lifetime. It was very difficult when they were children, and they resented her, and particularly her son Menachem so resented her, was furious at her. But interestingly, when I met them, they defended her to the hilt.
Really?
And particularly Menachem, the one who was so resentful. And I got to really like,
Where did you meet him?
I met them in Israel, and I interviewed them quite a few times.
Forgive me, where did you meet him in Israel?
Oh, I met them at their own home in Ramat Aviv.
Really?
Outside of Tel Aviv.
Were they open to talking to you?
At first they were not. And Menachem said to me, we're not going to cooperate with you. People have written all these bad things because they're negative things have written. And I said, look, I'm not going to promise you that I'm going to whitewash. I got to deal with her as a human being. But I will promise you that I will try to write a really fair book. And somehow that reached him, and he opened up to me. He had a lovely wife, Aya, who was a psychiatrist, his second wife. And they invited me into the home, and his sister, Sarah. And look, did they tell me everything? No, believe me, they didn't. But they were more open with me than I would have expected, and nice. I mean, we got along
and
quite well.
And your point is, he defended his mother, regardless
as
of how,
adult, right.
as an adult.
Right, totally. I mean, you could not then, you couldn't say one word. I mean, if somebody said, well, she didn't read that much. What do you mean she didn't read that much? I mean, you could not say one negative word about her as an adult. And they were very proud of her. Look what she had accomplished, and why not? So they changed. They grew up also.
Okay. 2 other themes in her life I want you to comment on. It seems like your book emphasizes the extent to which the Shoah, the Holocaust, had a profound impact upon her.
Yes.
And you have her saying, there is no other Zionism now during the period of the 30s and 40s. There's no other Zionism now except for the rescue of Jews. This is Zionism.
Right.
Talk to me about how her experience with the Holocaust influenced who she was.
She was so we were devastated. She was so devastated by the helplessness they had in Israel. They tried. They did what they could do. But it was, there was this poor little country. I mean, they didn't have great resources. And there was one might say almost a philosophic struggle. Ben-Gurion in some ways was on one side, Golda was on the other. Should they use those limited resources to build a nation for when the remnants of this horrible thing would come? Should they do it to try to save Jews? And Golda is saying, we have to do everything we can. There's no Zionism. It's not about later. It's about now. We have to do that. Nevertheless, look, they couldn't. They didn't save the 6 million. And she was so upset about this. And Golda, in a sense, saw herself as the mother of all the Jewish people.
Yes. You know?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, that's an important thing to understand.
Right.
Which is how we experienced her. But what's more interesting to me is it's how she experienced herself.
That's right. She saw herself as the mother of all the, not just the people in Israel,
yes,
but all the Jewish people. And she couldn't save these people. She couldn't do anything. And it was horrible for her. And she never wanted to have that sense of helplessness again. That became, in a way, a mantra. We will never feel helpless again. We have to rely on ourselves. We cannot rely on other people. We have to rely on ourselves. And there will never be a Jew again with the state existing who will go unarmed into battle, she said. And she felt very strongly about that.
All right, the other experience was her experience with Soviet Jewry. And in many ways, there were moments where she was a hero to the refusing movement and to Jews in the former Soviet Union as well. Speak to that for a moment.
Well, you know, she was the first ambassador to the Soviet Union from the new state of Israel. At that point, nobody knew anything about those Jews. Elia Wiesel called them the Jews of silence. So she came and she tried to meet Jews. She tried to get to know them. They brought a Torah for the rabbi in the synagogue. nothing happened. And then she went to the Choral Synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the New Year's and Day of Atonement. And when she came out, thousands upon thousands of Jews came out to meet her, to touch her, to call to her, Golda, our Golda. And she was overwhelmed by this. She was pushed into a taxi cab for her own safety, and all she could do was put her head out the window and say, thank you for having remained Jewish. And from then on, she was a huge advocate for Soviet Jewry. She did not, a lot of things that we know. She spoke out openly when she was prime minister, but she did things behind the scenes. Actually, I spoke to Elie Wiesel about this, and he said there were things that she did behind. We'll never know what they are behind the scenes to get to the authorities in the Soviet Union. She took this cause up as her own cause and became a hero. On the other side of it, however, there are people who, they blame her, blame the woman for everything, blame her because of these thousands who came out to greet her after the Choral Synagogue. Sprinkled among them were KGB agents, and many of those people were later arrested. And there was a big backlash against Jews. Stalin was already turning against the Jews, but they sort of some people blame Golda for that. I do not.
I don't either. I think it's silly. Okay, if you had known her, do you think you would have liked her?
I would have liked her. She would not have liked me. That's
Why?
what I think.
Impossible.
No, thank you. I would have been awed by her. I think I would have been awed.
No, I don't want that. Would you have
would
liked her?
I think I would have had mixed feelings because, here's why, because I think I would have known that she didn't like me. Why would she not have liked me? She would not have liked me because I was a Jew who had been a great Jewish education from the time I was a little girl till all of my life, really. I went to a day school, when I went to the Jewish Theological Seminary along with going to college. So I was very Jewish knowledgeable, but I did not make Aliyah. I did not go to live in Israel. She was very disappointed in American Jews because we didn't en masse go to Israel. And I think she would have been disappointed in me, and therefore I think she would have not taken me seriously, and therefore I think I would have been a little bit uncomfortable. I would not have liked her for that reason. So, but I would have admired her. That's
all right, fair enough. I'm going to make it harder for you. If you, the exact same person you are now, had made Aliyah, so that was not an issue.
Right, and I had met her.
And you met her. I'm looking for whether you think, as a human being, you would have been drawn to her, or is she the kind of person you say, there's a presence that happens every now and then in life. Golda Meir was bigger than life in many ways.
Yes, indeed.
And sometimes the people who are bigger in life are very difficult to feel connected to have a warm feeling for. So that's what I'm looking for. Are you going? Would you say to me, "Oh, I think she would have been lovely, and I would have enjoyed spending time with her," or do you think this human being who was bigger than life would have been difficult to become friends with?
No, I think I might have become friends with her. She had a good friend, Marie Serkin, and they were really real friends. She had other friends, women friends. People always think she only liked men. Now, I would say that generally speaking, she probably did like men more, but that's because she worked with them more. She was more comfortable with them, and because she liked them. Let's face it, she liked them. But I think if I had lived in Israel and I were involved in Zionism and the labor movement, if I were involved in Likud, she would have hated me. But if I was involved in the labor movement, I think we could have become friends. And she did have women friends.
Okay. What's the biggest myth you think we have about Golda, which you hope your book corrects?
I'll have to think about that one. That she was a man and not a woman. I think people think that, she was that thing that's said all the time. She was the best man in the cabinet. People repeat it all the time. She was not a man. She was a woman. She was a woman. She had her nails done all the time, regularly. She washed her hair. She was very vain about her hair. I mean, she wore it back in a bun, but she washed it. She would think things through by washing her hair. She loved that. She did care about how she looked. It was not latest fashion, but she cared about how she looked. She cared, as a woman cares about how she looked. And she cared about, she used her womanness, her womanliness, to further what she was doing. She had she used terms, though. She had a cabinet. It was her kitchen cabinet, right? It was, it's something women would have, a kitchen cabinet. And so she played on those parts of herself, and I think very successfully. So I think she didn't succeed because she was a man. She succeeded as a woman in a very male world, and she was able to balance this world with her own feminine attributes.
Very lovely. And a similar question, but it's skewed a hair different. What do you think the biggest one or two misunderstandings of the American Jews have of who she was? And what do you really hope people understand about the larger Golda Meir contribution, which we might not understand?
Well, I think people still see her as that sweet old grandmother, American Jews also. And I think they have to understand that every step of the way in the building of Israel, pre-Israel and Israel, she was involved in every step of the way. So I don't think people always think of her as one of the founders. She came a little bit later than the other founders. But I think they have to recognize that I'm not sure Israel would well, maybe it would have come into being, but it would not be what it was if it were not for this woman. Her great fundraising abilities, this made it happen. She raised huge amounts of money, and that was crucial. She set up the Israel Bonds for the women's division of Israel Bonds. She worked so hard for Israel Bonds. She did things that were crucial to the development of the state. I think Americans think of her as, yes, the first and only woman prime minister, the woman thing, and that's tremendously important. But I'm not sure, and they think of Ben-Gurion as the founder, and he was certainly, the visionary. But if it were not for Golda Meir, who did the work, I don't know how well Israel would have succeeded back then. So I think Americans just have to recognize her as a giant, as you said, larger than life, and not just this nice grandmotherly woman who came to ask you for money, but she was a founder and a builder and a creator, and I think that's tremendously important.
We have to begin to end, so I want to end sort of where we come back to in our discussion. Okay. It comes back to your childhood and your education. You love Jewish?
Do I love Jewish? Being Jewish?
Jewish. You love
Jewish? I love everything Jewish.
Okay. Francine, articulate for me. What is it that is so wonderful about this Jewish thing that you love so much? What is it?
It's very hard to articulate. It's family, for one thing. It's community. Community is very important. It's the ability to argue one Jew with another and go with and still be good friends.
Absolutely.
Ability to fight with God, which I think we all do at some time or another, to yell at God, and then to go and pray to God. I'm not sure any other religion has that kind of openness and ability to do that. And we have it, and so it's feeling comfortable. And also I love our texts. I love the texts. I love reading them. I love everything about them. I love the language. And every time you read something, you read the Torah over and over again in synagogue every year. Every time we read something, I find something new in a passage. And that is a wonderful thing. So it's a vibrant, living religion. And that keeps all of us alive.
You're a treasure. You're an absolute treasure.
Thank you so much.
You've written an important book that helps. It's important not only because it's a well-written book about a major figure in Jewish life, but it's an important book for us to read because it helps us understand more of an entire era. You've done that so often. You write wonderful book after wonderful book.
Thank you so
and it's
much.
wonderful having you here. I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha in all the work you do.
Thank you.
I hope that Lioness is a huge success
I hope
and
so
not your
too.
last one, and that there'll be many opportunities for us to be together.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You are an incredible interviewer and discussant and mind, and this was really fun for me.
Oh, thank you very, very much. Francine Klagsbrun, author of Lioness, Golda Meir, and the Nation of Israel. It's published by Shokin Books of Penguin Random House. It belongs in every home library. Once again, I invite you to be in touch with me with any of the ideas or thoughts you may have to some of the things that Francine and I said. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me, and I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.